you for coming this afternoon. We're really excited to see all these people and to share a few of the things that we learned over the year that we worked together as a faculty learning community. My name is Ella Donovan. You've probably seen my name multiple times on the emails that have gone out about this workshop. But I am in the English department. I coordinate graduate teaching assistants. I'm also the director of the Middle Tennessee Writing Project, which is a K-12 professional development model focusing on the teaching of writing in really K-16 situations. So let me tell you a little bit about our faculty learning community, and then Jim Scannell and Katie Chapman, who are English or English-related faculty members, are going to talk about the ways they've adapted their assignments. I also have handouts from people in other disciplines who couldn't be here today. Emily Barron from history and Kim Sadler from biology. So they have handouts that you're free to take with you to see how they implemented some of the ideas that we talked about. We worked for about a year, meeting every 2 weeks. And we began by each person in our learning community. There were 8 of us, and Ron Cates, I should mention him too. He was helping to facilitate as well. We each brought a professional piece of writing that addressed the writing issues in that discipline. And so we all looked at those together, and then as a result of that, we began to talk about what we wanted our students to be able to do, both in terms of writing and in terms of coming to grips with the disciplinary thinking and writing that each individual person wanted those students to have. So we really tried to think about what was appropriate in that particular discipline and let that professor really guide what was necessary. And so over the course of the year, we got to know and think about and talk about these very different disciplinary issues and how writing might meet those needs, and how we might best aid students to gain that skill or that knowledge. So we ended up coming together and going apart and doing these very distinctive kinds of writing tasks for our students. But I think that our takeaway, at least my takeaway, and Jim and Katie and Ron might want to add to this, was that scaffolding students to that disciplinary knowledge and that disciplinary, whatever those disciplinary conventions were, became a real concept we came back to over and over again. So what's going to happen now is Jim is going to talk about his assignment, how it changed, how the students are responding to it for about 15 minutes. Katie's going to talk about her assignment for about 15 or 20 minutes. And then I'm going to distribute some handouts and talk about some of the things that Emily and Kim tried to highlight in their assignments. And we have to circulate for questions. Okay?
All right, can you I'm going to send you guys out some copies of assignments that I developed last fall for my English 2030 General Education Sophomore Literature class. And to back up what Ellen has told us about here was sort of the idea of disciplinary ideals and gen ed classes and trying to get writing into gen ed classes. So if I'm teaching a sophomore level experience of literature class, I'm teaching that class for kids who are by and large not English majors. Now, as an English professor, I have a certain ideal that I want to come into that setting and make sure that my kids know how to do certain basic things that an English major should sort of know how to do. And so I might assign a paper on Shakespeare's Hamlet. I expect that to be a thesis-driven paper. They should have an argument. I expect them to be able to quote lines from Shakespeare's Hamlet and discuss those lines. And I expect everything to be formatted and cited in MLA format because those are the conventions of my discipline. And I want to give these kids the scholarly foundations to succeed in that discipline. Because there might be an education major, English minor in that group, and there might be an English, somewhere I might convince someone to become an English major. This is the attitude with which I think we approach a lot of our general education classes, that we have a responsibility to convey these scholarly foundations, especially in our writing assignments. But the fact of the matter is, this is what, and even though I originally had started off in this FLC group, wanting to do some more work with a project I had my students do the previous semester in freshman 1010, where instead of writing a paper, I had my students do a Prezi project and thinking about some of these multimodal projects. The big revelation takeaway for me from this FLC was that maybe we don't have to be quite so uptight about scholarly conventions. And we hear at this university a great deal about student engagement these days. Now, I see a few of my fellow English colleagues in the room here. What other majors do we have here in the room here? What are some of the other departments you guys are in? Any history, foreign language, some foreign language folks, whatever? What other kinds of disciplines do we have here? Public relations.
Dance.
Dance. And obviously there's a certain amount of scholarly stuff that goes on in dance. I suppose these kids have to do with some papers and portfolios and things like that to put together.
We have dance history, performance studies.
Right. So there's disciplinary standards that happen there. Oh, public relations. When did public relations become fun for you?
On the job when I was doing it. I started seeing how all the pieces connected.
How do you convey that experience to your students? Is writing a paper about public relations going to really give them a window into that experience?
No.
So this gets into what we want to try to do a little bit, is try to capture a little bit of fun, a little bit of engagement with our students, even if fundamentally we're going to cast off a little bit of scholarly rigor and a little bit of sort of adherence to sort of MLA guidelines or whatever that might be in order to do some projects that involve a little bit more interaction. So I want to show you guys just a short project that I did. And this gets back into ways that you can implement these things into your classes. This is not even, I still have my students do a 4-page Hamlet paper that was about the David Tennant movie version. Sort of trying to do a fun thing with that. But this was a short, so this was taking out a short 2-page formal analysis of a piece of text and replacing it with the Hamlet Dream Team cast project. And I totally admit that if you really asked me to defend this from a pedagogical point of view, what disciplinary foundations was I laying down here? Not so much. But my students all reported they had fun with this project, coming up with, going to IMDb, finding pictures of actors, and coming up with the people they thought should play in their hypothetical production of Hamlet. I put a rule in they couldn't pick more than 2 people from the same show. So you couldn't just do the all Breaking Bad Hamlet or the all Sons of Anarchy Hamlet or something like that. I want to show you just one of these real quick. And this was a Chinese student who was, I think, a Chinese student who wanted to be an English major. But she gave me the all Chinese version of Hamlet. And do I know who any of these actors are? No. But it was fun to read her little write-up at the end of this. And she goes, for example, she explains at the end here that the guy she picked for Claudius is a famous actor who is especially arranged to perform Mao Zedong and all his, so he's got the official Chinese government job of playing Mao Zedong. And here he is playing Claudius in her version of Hamlet. And I thought that was funny, and that sort of captured my imagination a little bit. And this is something that, again, my students were playing. Sometimes they were picking, some other obvious soap opera people. 1 or 2 of them were picking cartoon characters and didn't quite have the plot of this, making a plausible sort of Hamlet. And sometimes they were mixing dead people, Robin Williams showing up, and sort of like, okay, this can only happen in heaven kind of thing. But yeah, all right. But so they still had some fun with it, and for the most part, my students engaged with this material. They spent more than an hour on this project, et cetera, et cetera. And so in terms of what I should be doing in a sophomore level general education class, yes, I should be getting my students to a point where, and again, I gave you guys a handout, it includes one of there is my song lyric analysis paper. And instead of having my students write, the other one is the short story project is a creative writing project. The song lyric analysis one was towards the end of the semester. And instead of writing a boring paper about the poetry of Emily Dickinson, where, let's face it, the students are going to go home, look at the prompt, do a little surfing on the internet, read a few paragraphs off of Spark Notes, and knock something out at 2 a.m. the night before it's due. And they may technically meet the requirements of the assignment. You may even give them a D on that paper, but was the student ever really engaged with the project? And so I was trying to find ways to get my students that feel like they had something at stake in a poetry analysis paper. So I came up with the rock song lyric analysis, where the idea is that you have to, so it's still an argumentative paper. The argument is, why should your artist be included in this hypothetical anthology of popular culture? Defend that by doing some close reading of some song lyrics. And still have MLA citations in at the end. So some of those foundations and disciplinary foundations are still sneaking in the back door. But as far as they're concerned, they're writing a paper about their favorite rock band. And it's that too. And if the kids can't get excited about trying to defend their favorite hip-hop artist or their favorite rock band, And again, some of the kids who might otherwise have been not engaged with the Emily Dickinson paper were able to pick their favorite rappers, and they were engaged. And so that's the kind of a framework. So again, you can do this sometimes with long papers. You can do this with short papers. And it does mean giving up a little bit of class time sometimes to set up some of these creative projects or to let kids present their Hamlet Dream Teams or whatever. A little bit of content might get lost in the process. But if the kids are engaged and having fun with the material, oh, and by the way, these kinds of papers are much harder to steal off the internet. And so that's part of the other part of the philosophy that we have here with trying to get these kids to do these slightly more creative, fun projects. And yes, I am doing a creative writing project. Now, one problem here is when you do something like the creative writing paper, the short story paper there, where again, I took this famous Russian short story, Lady with the Pet Dog, and I had the story ends very abruptly. It's a classic Chekhov sort of, little slice of life ending, and then boom, it ends. And then you have to figure what's next for these characters. They're having this extramarital affair. Will they be able to leave their husbands and wives that they're married to and go off and run away together? And I said, why don't you guys write an ending? And it was very frustrating, of course, when my students insisted on killing off one or both characters, which really isn't what the story's about at all. But there were some things that you learn along the way, like keeping consistent verb tense to what Chekhov uses. Consistent point of view. We only see the story from Dmitri's point of view, never Anna's point of view. Are you switching point of view or not in your ending? Historical context. What things would or wouldn't happen in 1900. How easy is it to get a divorce in 1900? So all of those little things then filter into the creative writing project. And there's a few of those standards I can point to, point of view, verb tense, or say your technical things that you did right or did wrong in your creative writing piece. It's still a challenge to figure out how to grade that and who's really making a better effort, who's, done a better job of that. A few of them were laughably bad, a few of them were fairly good. Some of the kids picked up some things that Chekhov was doing with color imagery, the use of the color gray in the story that I hadn't really noticed as much or talked about in class. And these kids found that on their own. I thought, hey, this is good analysis. So you might be surprised sometimes what your students can do if you give them a little room to be creative. Okay, I think that's about what I had to cover there. Then we'll try and keep this the short 15-minute sort of version here. So I think hopefully that's all right. So Katie, why don't you jump on in here and tell us what you got?
Thank you. Okay. I don't have a handout for this project, but I do have a online presentation that I'm happy to share if anybody wants a copy. And I'm just going to kind of take you guys through the change that I made to my 1020 course this semester. My approach was a little bit different because I was focusing on a writing intensive course. So for me, it wasn't so much about how do I bring writing into this course in a meaningful way, but how do I make the writing that we're already doing and what we're already doing with the writing more meaningful and help students kind of take the strategies and things that we're learning with them to their next classes. And so when I started the project, mine again kind of altered over the course of the year, over the course of the learning community. What I was really interested in was community-based learning and thinking about how students, in addition to learning how to do secondary research and being introduced to, academic scholarship, which is one of the goals of 1020, I was really interested in getting them to kind of create some new knowledge, maybe go and do, some observations or do an interview and have some data that they could draw conclusions from, that they could make meaning from as a way to support, arguments. So they're working with, material that they collected or developed and along with secondary research they were finding online. So that was one of the things I was interested in. And the way that I ended up doing this was actually nothing like what I thought I would do when I came into the faculty learning community. What I did was I actually implemented the faculty learning community model. Sorry, I don't know how to do this apparently. A faculty learning community model in my English 1020 course. So these were research communities in my class. And my goals for this, some of these kind of overlap with the goals of 1020 as well. To foster a stronger sense of the research and writing processes, to underscore the uses for creative investigation as a way to create new knowledge about a subject, to promote the use of critical reflection on the research and writing processes, and to have students kind of create a set of best practices for research and writing at MTSU, because that's really what they should be getting out of the course, is learning how to do scholarly research writing. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go through the process, and I've got some extra information. I think that this project, it didn't require a lot of changes kind of day to day, although we did this over the course of the semester. And I've put some kind of notes in here at the bottom that I'll go through as well about what it took kind of logistically in class. So what we did was at the beginning of my major research or project assignment sequence, they work on one research project for the first like two-thirds or three-quarters of the semester. And they're working with their research in different ways, and it culminates in their research, their major research paper. So at the beginning of this assignment sequence, after everyone has chosen topics, I organize them into small groups of 3 to 5 students. When they met early on in the semester, they would discuss their topics, learn about each other's interests and knowledge about the topic. So they were kind of just at the beginning of the process talking about what topic did I choose, why did I choose it, why am I interested in it, and what knowledge do I already have. They kept research journals, and this was kind of my catch-all grade for like homework and in-class assignments. They would discuss their successes, challenges, and discoveries in their group meetings, and they would also help troubleshoot problems as they came up. So if a student was having trouble finding research on an aspect of his or her research topic, they could, provide, for example, well, did you try searching with this term, or did you try this database, that we learned about from the library, those kinds of things. These were really easy changes to make for me in my class. I gave them guided workshops. Often they were meeting for 15 minutes or so at the beginning or end of class once a week. So sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on what else we had planned for the week. And I asked them to prepare for the group meetings in a variety of ways. So through their homework assignments, if I knew that the groups were going to be meeting one day to maybe they're kind of into the research process or just getting started, and I really wanted them to kind of sit and help each other solve some problems that they were having or challenges that they were running into with the research. One of the homework assignments that I had was to have them write about kind of what the biggest obstacle was that they were facing with the research. Is there one thing that you're not finding anything on? And write down maybe the search terms that they were using in the library's databases. So they could go to the meeting prepared with that and use that as the basis for their discussions for that group meeting. And then each meeting would also have a goal. So, at the end of the meeting, you should have one new, research strategy or, a set of 3 to 4 new search terms that you hadn't tried before. So homeworks were often collected and graded, but some of the things, like if I had a goal of, come up with 3 to 4 search terms that you haven't tried that your peers helped you come up with, that was something I could just check off as they were leaving class. So this is your in-class assignment. Show me that you've got your search terms, and it really didn't add a lot to the kind of grading workload, especially for those times in the semester where they were also, turning in major projects and things like that. So they worked in this way throughout the semester, and the research groups would meet with goals kind of to mirror where we were in the process of the formal writing projects. And then at the end of the semester, after they submitted their big research paper, the last project we did was a collaborative presentation. Still working in their research community, so they worked with the same group all semester. Their first task was to go back through their research journals and pick out the strategies and the information and things that ended up being most useful for them over the course of the semester. Like this section of our research handbook was really, really helpful, or this piece of information that the librarian gave us during our library session was something I didn't forget, and I used it over and over again. So they came to class prepared. Actually, that was another homework assignment. Was to go back through their previous journal entries and make a list of the things that were most valuable and most useful to them. And then they met in their groups and they kind of compared what they have. So they've collected, in their group kind of a body of data. And then they were looking for overlapping strategies, advice, things that they all did or things that were really important to all or most people in the group. And from that, they created a working list of best practices for writing and researching at MTSU. The next step was to organize the list that they came up with as a group into a presentation that they were going to make in class. So again, since this was a formal writing assignment, we dedicated a lot of class time to writing and workshopping and working on this in class. But I also had an opportunity to bring in other topics related to the project goal, since the formal writing assignment was meeting some of the other course goals of 1020. So this was probably the most time that we spent on the research communities in class was during this project, where maybe whole or most of a class period would be dedicated to this project. They were asked to prepare in the same way. And I think that a culminating assignment like this it's really flexible. You know, it wouldn't necessarily have to be a presentation. I mean, I don't think it would even necessarily have to be a formal writing assignment. It could be something smaller. It could be an informal presentation. It could be, you know, a kind of reflective piece that the group wrote and submitted, anything like that. Anything that kind of helped further the goals of the class that it was being used for. For the conclusion, I just kind of wrote in some of my observations. This assignment was really useful for me in my class, having students really reflect critically on what they were doing, what was useful. It gave them a chance to, after that big project's done, which is the most heavily weighted assignment in the semester, the one that they're probably most stressed about over the course of the semester, after that was all said and done, you know, we kind of took a step back and looked at that process as a whole to get the information for this project. And this was really useful. It kind of reinforced the skills of kind of analyzing and drawing conclusions from information, and helped them think about what they could take with them moving forward. And the reason why I chose these are what was really demonstrated to me during their presentations, which were all made in class. We had 5 groups present, and every group had at least 1 or 2 overlapping strategies or ideas with another group, and a lot of them were things that we didn't necessarily talk about in great detail in class. So every group that presented, one of their pieces of advice was, you have got to start early. You've got to start the research process early. You can't just, go and find things a week before it's due and expect to be able to use them well. And even though that's something that, I would often say in class, like, this is when you should be starting your research, it wasn't something that we really, it wasn't something that I lectured about or that we talked about, a lot throughout the semester. Another one that they all had was specific databases that were useful to them. So there were things like, they weren't all necessarily the same database, but a lot of them really liked the main search tool on the library's webpage, where you can just type it in and kind of get every result. They liked that to get an idea of what's out there on their topic, and then they all kind of came up with different specific databases. But they were able to look at that process and say, you want to get an idea of what's out there, and then that could help you find, more specific resources. So those are some of the things that that surprised me. And again, they all, by the time the presentations were done, I was able to kind of look at the class and say, okay, so, what is it that we know we have to do always in the research process? And they could just pick out, well, everyone in class said the same thing, so obviously this is important. So that's all I have about the research communities. We're going to do questions.
Yeah, can you talk about how this might look in another class?
Yeah, sure. So, thinking about, I teach composition in the English department, 1010 and 1020, and then I've also taught the 2030 class before. So thinking about a class maybe like 2030, I think that a research community could be structured in a similar way. So it could be, here's what we were learning about what it means to read and analyze literature. And then, at the end of the semester, we're kind of stepping back and looking at what are the strategies or the parts of the process that were true for everybody. Everybody's process is a little bit different, but what are some of those underlying kind of foundations that we need to know? I think anything that in any class, having them step back and look at the process, how did we learn to do this? How did we learn to talk about this or write about this or, do these experiments or explore in this way, and what was really useful. What can I take with me and apply to something else? Does that kind of answer your question? Okay.
I think any class where a project is due, on the day the project is due, you can have the students break into little breakout groups and discuss the process of how they wrote their papers and how the project came out, what were the strategies they used to make that process work. So that's just a little, again, it's always sometimes hard to find something fun to do on the day the paper's due because no one's done it.
Okay, I'm going to hand out these assignments and talk just a little bit about them, and then just a couple things. I think Emily Behrens is the History 1010. She teaches Western Civ, and we really came around again to the same idea of scaffolding, of breaking things into parts, of getting students to think about the process of constructing the writing task, whatever it was, and breaking it down so that we could give some specific instruction for that particular aspect of it, and then eventually they would get it all turned in. So you can see on Emily's, her email is at the bottom of that page, where she actually has steps in her process, and each of those steps allows her to give feedback to her students or to get her students to reflect, sometimes in groups, about what they were doing and the purpose of what they were doing. For me, the most exciting assignment was Kim Sadler's biology reports, because they have to produce biology reports in their lab. And we spent a lot of time talking about how the disciplinary thinking is very foreign to those students, and how she could use the biology report format as a way of introducing that kind of thinking. And so we talked a lot about how maybe in one aspect of an experiment, maybe the focus would be on noting your process, because that's an important part of a biology report. And so for that experiment, maybe all they would turn in would be a very clear description of the process of the experiment. And then again, another experiment, they would really focus on the conclusions or the materials or the various components that come with the biology report. So even though these assignments might not be right in your disciplinary field, I'm hoping that what you can see from them is that the professor, the member of the faculty learning community, really spent some time writing down what the assignment was supposed to do, and then gave the instruction and the task some focused attention before the students had to turn a whole one in. So that's what we spent a lot of time doing last year. And I'm wondering if you have any questions either for Jim or for Katie, or anything about thinking about a faculty learning community and how that process went.
I might note with the faculty learning community, most of them are academic year. We did ours differently. We did ours as calendar year, which I think there are some real benefits. We were able to come in the spring semester or the beginning of spring semester in January, get the pedagogical background, find out what each other was looking for, and we had the summer to think about things, the summer to plan. And as we talked about in fall, the people in the community were already putting them to work. So I think there was a real advantage to that, as opposed to a learning community that goes academic year, because you don't have the time to think and process in between December and January. There's just not the time. So this allowed for some real reflection and the thinking process, which I think I saw the results, and you probably did as well.
Yeah.
Did you guys meet in the summer?
No.
Okay.
There have been some learning FLCs that have decided to have one sort of retreat meeting during the summer. For our group, it wasn't conducive because people were traveling literally around the world. But for some FLCs, everyone's local, it's a good time to touch base and kind of look forward.
And the bigger the faculty learning community, the harder it is to find out. Other questions or comments?
I had a question for Katie about the assignments as far as, they got the big research project, the normal research project they're doing in the middle, and then they're doing a learning community group project immediately after that. Do they, I'm wondering how you're presenting that to them. Do they know about that ahead of time? So are they thinking sort of externally about it throughout the research process?
I tried to conduct the group meetings or the workshops, the research community meetings, sorry, in a way that's what they were focusing on those workshops. So they would be thinking and talking about the research process as they were doing it, and then, having something written down, whether it's something they just hung on to or something that they submitted and I commented on and gave back. Most of those were just really low stakes, kind of completion or check plus, check minus, that kind of thing. So they didn't really have to worry about the presentation until after they turned everything in. They could do the workshops, which should have helped them move further along with each assignment that they had. But they really didn't have to worry about that presentation until it was time to get started, because then they could look back at the work that they did in their communities and go, oh yeah, this was really helpful, or this really worked for me. And that was the only kind of research that they needed to be able to do the presentation well.
I was just kind of curious if that was something that was kind of on their brain the entire time they were doing that middle, or is that something that was, okay, now let's reflect, is it kind of a surprise, or was it?
Yeah, they knew, we talked at the beginning of the semester about the trajectory, and we talked about it because they get the syllabus and schedule, and then they also get the assignments for the semester at the same time. So, at the very beginning of the semester, I can tell them, here's where we are, here's where we're heading, at the very end. But then, so they know, but they're able to do the assignment pretty well with the material that they've worked on throughout the semester. Or at least it worked out that way this semester.
Yeah, so they're doing that in the project as the entire semester.
Jim, can you talk, I don't know if you implement, I think you tried some of these assignments last.
Yep. All three of those were live assignments last fall, yes.
So do you think that your students, you talked about how you are achieving some of the goals of the course, and you may have had to give up a little bit of some of the other goals, but at the end of the day, do you think your students know as much or more about reading literature than they would have with the more scholarly kinds of writing?
I'm not going to make any grandiose claims. C writers are still C writers. Did my kids spend a little bit more time and invest a little bit more of themselves in some of these projects than they might have otherwise? Perhaps. And if one of the metrics of success is how much time did our kids actually spend working on their papers, then I would say that was a success. So it's still a gen ed class, and I'm not saying that I produced, and I don't know if I convinced anybody to become an English major or anything quite like that. So I'm not going to make any grandiose claims, but I would make the claim that the effort was there in some of these kids, and at least more time and effort went into the projects that might have otherwise gone into the project.
Other questions, comments?
Let me say that another point that we sort of came up with in our FLC was that in sophomore level classes especially, we feel like we need to give background in our disciplines. We feel like we have a fair bit of lecturing that we have to do. And I got into this business because I love the sound of my own voice. Okay, there's no doubt about my ability to lecture. But there are things that you can do. For example, lately I've been giving my students group activity, group quizzes, where I put them in sort of little response groups of 4, write some fairly hard quiz questions on the board and say it's open book, you can talk about it with the classmates and see if you guys can work out answers to these questions. And again, pedagogically, are there some slacker kids who are riding the coattails of the smarter kids? Probably. But there's actually moments there where the kids are teaching each other, and it's good stuff. And I sit in the corner and take a nap, and it's less about me teaching and more about the kids teaching each other. And that's something you can do. Having your students break into groups to discuss the writing process that got them through a paper the day the paper is due. That might take time away from the lecture that you wanted to give. But were your kids paying attention to that lecture anyway? Were they awake? Were they, et cetera, et cetera. So finding ways to get the kids to small group workshops, especially, are a way to engage kids and get them to talk to each other and work through some problems with each other. And maybe the kids are getting more out of that than they would have gotten out of your lecture. So sacrificing some content to put in some short writing activities or some short group response activities and some other fun little, even if it's a fun hypothetical thought experiment project, some of those things are things that the kids will remember and engage with and take away from something from the class.
There are obviously other ways to get that lecture content to students other than just lecturing.
And Katie, I have a question for you. So, I guess it was last spring you said, I'm turning my composition class into an FLC, which I thought was a really interesting idea. So can you talk about the dynamics of the research communities and how you think that strengthen your students' knowledge or their...
Yeah, and I'm still kind of thinking about like applying this to other disciplines to that question, because I think that answer is kind of vague. But what I really started with was like, what do students need to, what's something or a group of things that students need to take out of this class and need to take with them somewhere else? And we're going to make that the goals of the research communities, because like the faculty learning community had, clear goals. We're talking about writing in gen ed course. And it had to culminate in some kind of knowledge, that based on kind of our explorations and thinking and reflecting and all that kind of stuff. And so that's really what I wanted to do. And I think one of my favorite moments this semester in the research communities, one of my students was a biology major, and he wanted to write about genetically modified food. And so he found an article that he wanted to use found in the library's research. And he was like, it's a good article, but I just have a lot of questions about, I just have a lot of questions about the topic. And so he came into class the next day. They were in their research community, and he was like, well, I heard him telling some of the other students, he was like, I looked at the article and I looked at it and I couldn't get some of my questions answered. So I just emailed the author. And he teaches at a university in London, maybe, and he said, so I just emailed him, and I got a response, and this is what he told me, and he was so excited and so enthusiastic, and his group members were really receptive. They were really impressed about it. This was all something that he just kind of did on his own, but it was those moments like that where they weren't just kind of doing their research in a vacuum, that they were able to sit in those groups, and even if it was a day that they were like, I haven't found anything new, and I'm really struggling, and I'm really stuck, and somebody else is saying, oh, me too, I'm in the exact same boat, that they can understand that the research process, there are going to be similarities to, even if everybody goes about it a little bit differently, like the writing process, that there's going to be similarities, and that those differences in strategies, they can kind of help their peers maybe. Well, I didn't try that. And so those moments were often the most interesting and excited, and I haven't seen students get as excited about each other's projects in my 1020 classes as I did last semester, when they were able to talk and kind of follow each other through that process a little bit more. So, they were also a wonderful bunch of students. So
You're undercutting your methodology right there. Good. Any other questions you have for us?
Somebody throw out another major and challenge us to come up with fun, inventive writing concepts.
Well, actually, I think one thing that we could talk about, and this really would affect other majors, talk a little bit about how you assess the more creative projects.
It does throw us out. Okay, if you give me the assignment, the Hamlet, MLA character analysis paper kind of thing, can I grade that in my sleep? Yes, I can. I've been doing it for years. We're comfortable with our assessment practices that we've developed. And so you have to sort of step back a little bit and think about design and project, and then you get back to other things. You get into rhetoric. Who is the audience for this project? Who are you trying to persuade? How are you trying to persuade them? And so some of those kinds of things that you can step back and think about and try to find other kinds of objective criteria. If I was going to do that check-off short story project again, I would rewrite the assignment sheet to change the criteria a little bit, because there's stuff I figured out after I tried it the first time about the point of view and the verb tense and some of the other imagery that's used in the story, and I could put some of that stuff in there as, this is the stuff I want you to focus on, and I'm going to use that as my criteria when I grade. So I sort of had to figure out the criteria as I was grading it. And that is going to be a little bit of an unfamiliar territory. Sometimes you got to kind of write new rules on that stuff and figure out. I mean, once you've seen 50 projects, you can start to figure out who did it right and who did it wrong, and then you start to see the differences, and you can start to articulate the criteria. So it's a growth process. Katie, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was going to say kind of the same thing, just starting with like, what are the goals of the project and what do you want students to get out of it? So if you really want to see that they're analyzing the story for, use of imagery or themes or something like that, then you can be that specific, I would think, in the grading criteria. Like, I want to see that you're using a similar, style linguistically, or that you're carrying some of these things. And that way students know, because it might be unfamiliar to them to those kinds of assignments. And so if you can use those kind of signposts to say, this is what I want you to focus on, like creativity and having, robots and babe kind of, at the end of the story isn't going to help you as much as really kind of focusing on
having the character, having the character in 1900 contract HIV. That was my, oh God, shoot me now. But try something new, experiment a little bit. The trying can be very revealing, and so the assessment may need a little tweaking as you work through the process. And I would certainly tweak the assessment on some of these projects the second time around, and try to articulate the rubric or the grading goals a little more clearly the second time around. But that's a learning process. We how do we become decent teachers? I hope it's through a process of trial and error and trying out strategies and keeping the stuff that works. So this is an opportunity to try some new strategies.
I see your hand, Bob, but I just want, did that end, is that where you were going with your question, Ron?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
You mentioned scaffolding. Are there any templates that other people use for that? Because scaffolding is done in several different ways. What does it look like in a classroom? Like over a syllabus?
I think that's kind of disciplinary specific, but for me it's beginning where they make breaking something down into smaller chunks so that they can be successful along the way, and maybe having some sort of project that ties all of those things together.
Take, for example, a business case study. If you're in a business program, you probably see business case studies quite a lot. There are recognizable parts to a business case study. Can you break those parts of a business case study down, and can you develop small projects or in-class projects where the idea the students are going to work up some sort of pretend case study or have them do some sort of sample case study project over the course of the term? You could break that into parts and have the students do parts of that at different times in the term and build certain projects around sort of focusing on parts of the case study.
And you would want to do it in the real world way, which is not necessarily with the first part that in the case study. You'd want to do it experientially. So what is the thing that somebody in the real world would see first, or what is the problem that they would, and that's where you would begin your scaffolding. Not, you have to write an introduction, because of course the introduction is the last thing you write. So making the scaffolding reflect how real experience, how somebody would approach it in the real world rather than as producing a document. The document should be the report or the evidence of all the thinking that went into it. So I think that that's the other key thing about scaffolding.
I don't know if there's really an answer to this, but if you could speak into it, kind of related to things you guys said. One of the things that I've just been banging my head against the wall is that when I try to give creative science, very practical assignments, but I'm finding that students, I give them instructions, then I realize, well, I didn't tell them to do this or this, and they didn't even think about it. So then I put this and this in the next assignment, and then they do those two things, but don't do anything else. It's like if I don't tell them, you have to do these 25 steps exactly, they don't do the 25 steps. So I'm challenged between that. I want them to see this, to be able to think about this as a project and not an introduction, a background, situation, an analysis. But if I don't give them those pieces, they can't seem to put it together. But if I give them the pieces, all they do is copy it. Does that make sense?
Our students are used to a certain amount of handholding, and this goes back to their high school backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a time and a place to hold their hands a little bit, and there's a time and a place to throw them in the deep end of the pool, and so you guys need to figure this part out for yourselves. And they won't always do it perfectly, but the process of trying to figure it out, the ones that engage the process, if they're interested in the topic and they're engaging with the topic and they start to make a few steps in the right direction, take what you can get and try to get them to take those baby steps, because some of those kids need to start taking baby steps in terms of thinking through critical problems on their own. And so obviously there may be, if something is going to be an absolute roadblock, then you need to do a little handholding. If something is, if the project is going to suffer a little bit and not come out precisely like it should because the kid didn't do it exactly the right way, but in the process of trying to work it through it on their own, they're going to learn something, let them swim.
Other ideas about that?
I think that one thing to maybe forget is that these students come in, they research all the time. All the time, phones, computers, iPads, whatever. And for them to be able to connect that if you have these skills already, you know how to do this, that connecting what they're doing in their real lives, and it's not just paper topic wise, it's some of the skills of getting them to realize, oh yeah, I know how to do this research. I know that Wikipedia is not a real good source.
I don't know. I looked at Wikipedia this morning because I'm going to go talk about the Supremes in a couple minutes, and I thought, I know them experientially, but do I know their background? And so I went to YouTube and I went to Wikipedia. But I kind of want to also say that sometimes if students recognize that there is a genre, there is this thing called, I don't know what it is in public relations, right? Now, there might be a kind of report that is considered the standard way things are done in the discipline, and they need to see multiple ones of those because they need to conform to those conventions. But the experience of learning how to do that may need to be a two-step process, which is you have to do all the work underneath, and then you have to put it into a document that looks like these. And that's where there might be a lot of similarity because you have to have this first and then you have to have this next because that's what everybody expects of that document. So I think that the interesting part, I think there's two problems there. One is that they need to understand how to do the work. And another thing is then how do you turn that work into this document? And there may be a lot of hand-holding at that point because they've never done it before.
That could also be an opportunity for, here are the models. These are really great examples of this kind of document. Now, as a class or in small groups, yes, you guys talk and figure out what makes these successful, and so they can almost create their own kind of criteria for this is what a good one looks like.
And I have done that, and I
Yeah.
found that that's very helpful. Because they're picking out some of those pieces without me telling me, oh, here's the anatomy of this. They start recognizing that on their own, and then I give them a word to attach to that, a title to attach that. I just am struggling, and maybe it's I have to accept some of it as being 20 years old, and them having been led and scheduled and instructed, just so they've been micromanaged in their life that I'm trying to find that place. How can I get them to stop thinking of it as, oh, I have to do this step, this step, this step, this step, and think about, oh, I'm creating an assignment. I'm engaging with material. I'm thinking about what it means instead of just writing these 5 sentences.
Yeah, well, I was talking a lot about, it just reminded me of what Elizabeth Barlow was talking about text series. I know not everybody was there, but students' prior knowledge of what Kate was saying, they have a lot of these skills sort of in the back subconscious somewhere. And just asking them simple, well, how did you learn about Facebook? How did you learn about Twitter? No one taught you that. You discovered how that system with all of these different parts work together on your own because you were interested and engaged. And I'm wondering if it's connecting, sort of meeting them where they are and connecting to something that they're already experts in and bridging that gap somehow. I use models quite a bit in my writing class, but also, how's a magazine typically put together? How did you figure that out? You went in, then experienced it somehow. Okay, and how do we, I guess the trouble is, how do you connect that to this report that they have to do? So maybe bringing those subconscious skills out into the open and these little breakout groups that they were talking about. Useful, potentially.
Well, we are almost out of time, so does anybody have a last minute question? Thank you for coming. My email is just my name, like everybody else's here. So, and the people who put their emails on their assignments said they would be happy if you wanted to contact them. But thank you very much for coming. I hope it was helpful.
Thank you all for that.
We'll drop off your evaluation forms on the way out.
To present, you have to fill out forms. We'll let you all.